Good evening and happy Chanukah, broadcasting from Israel, from East Gush Etzion, in a very special place where I live not far from a place called Bor Asfar, the pit of Asfar, which is where basically Shimon and the remaining Maccabees and followers were hiding out after almost the lowest point, perhaps, in the battle for our survival, where Yehuda Maccabee was already killed and Yonatan was ambushed and killed in a very tragic story. And we were running away and hiding in one of the worst times for us. And if we'd have given up here in the desert of Tekoa, it would have been all over. And it's here where we picked ourselves up and said, push through, we're going to make it. And so it's a very, very momentous occasion to be able to speak at these kinds of difficult times and to talk about Chanukah from this place. So let's introduce the topic, a culture clash. When I talk about Chanukah, Chanukah is very easy to relate to when we talk about the miracle of the oil and standing up for our values. But when we consider Chanukah in context with the people whom we were struggling with, we remember that it's not just the Greeks, but rather it's the history of over 100 years of buildup to that clash, which was actually Hellenized Jews against Jews, which was a pressure that was building up over a century and longer since the conquest of Israel by the Hellenistic kingdoms, Alexander the Great and his successors. So it was really the culture which threatened our survival, and only later did it lead to an actual military clash, and that was for a very short period of time, relatively speaking. The big story, which we are still part of today, is really the cultural influences of Greece and the West. And I want to talk about the two different sides of this. There's the Greek side, and then there's the Jewish reaction to that because of the similarities that are inherent in the Greek culture, which Jews related to, and therefore started leaving the traditional ways and sort of going into the Greek ways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be focusing through our history and archaeology on the Greeks, but along the way, I'm going to point out similarities to Judaism and to Torah and to ways in which we felt affinity to certain things, to the point where, like, you ignore all the differences, but you look at the similarities. So let's start with Alexander the Great, because Alexander the Great really begins the period in history which is called the Hellenistic period, the period in which the culture of the Greeks spreads across the globe like a wildfire, like around the Mediterranean basin all the way to the border of India. So we are now in the Israel Museum, and we are looking at a few different interesting things that are happening at the same time. Number one, there's the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, all the way outside the window. And we are inside the museum in an exhibit called Greeks, Romans, and Jews. So we're in the archaeological department in the area that's dedicated to the Second Temple by Cheni. And in here is a statue found in Beit She'an from the Roman period, and it is a bust of Alexander the Great, found in Israel. So there's a lot to unpack here, but the very fact that a bust of Alexander the Great has been around for a while after his death in Israel means that his influence has lasted for that long. And this part of the museum, which normally on Hanukkah we would be doing tours here, but the Israel Museum right now is open in a very strict manner, so it's not really possible, unfortunately. This is an area that's dedicated to the Hellenistic administration in Israel. This is the famous Heliodorus inscription, which mentions a story from the book of Maccabees, which is one of the things that led up to the tensions that led up to the eruption of the battles, because it has to do with the extortion of the Jews, stealing the money from the Beis Hamikdash, from the temple. So there's a lot going on here in the museum that I would love to be able to visit as well. So that's there. Now, some more areas in Israel which relate to the Hellenistic period and their successors, which is the Romans, is of course the aspects of Greek and Roman culture, because Romans sort of subsumed Greece, which is found in Israel. So here's just one example of many. You may recognize this. It's the very famous theater in Caesarea, which is named the amphitheater, because people think that if you add a prefix, that means it's half a theater, but amphitheater is actually like the Colosseum. It's the full circle. But this theater was built by King Herod. So it's Roman, but it is a continuation of the Greek culture that was throughout the land from the time of the Hellenistic period. So here we are. Of course, today we come here and we will hear Yaakov Shweki and Aaron Razel or Hanan ben Ari playing here. But in the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the Second Temple, this is where Jews were slaughtered and butchered as sport as gladiators. So things have turned around a little bit. But this is one of several very famous theaters in Israel, including Beit Guvrin and Beit She'an, and so on and so forth. So the culture of the Greeks is definitely still around today. I mean, plays and theater and music and the arts and culture. Okay. Now I'd like to take us to a very important place, the birthplace of the culture of the Greeks. And if you're unfamiliar with Google Earth, it does jump around a little bit. I hope you're not going to get dizzy by it. I wish I could make it a little bit slower, but right now they just updated the program and I have to roll with the punches. So when we talk about the Greeks, we are talking about this area, the islands of Greece, which is just sandwiched between the western border of Turkey, like Troy, the Trojan War, and the big boot of Italy. So here's the Greek islands. This is where the Greeks come from, and we're going to focus on Olympus, on Athens, and on Sparta, different aspects of them. But when we talk about the Greek culture really comes out of Athens, here in green. Athens is to Greece what Jerusalem is to Judaism, and I'd like to just stress that point in passing, because I'm going to develop this as we go. The cultural clash with Greece is foreshadowed in Zechariah with the words "Ve'orarti banaich Tzion al banaich Yavan." I will arise the children of Zion against the children of Greece, which Tzion, Yavan, when you hear it in Hebrew, are very, very similar. There's just the letter Tzadik, which is an added part of Yavan to become Tzion. So there is something very, very deep in the connection between those different cultures that clashed, because when Noach blesses his blesses his two sons and curses Ham, he blesses Yefet with beauty. Yaft Elohim leyefet veishkon be'ohalei Shem. He says that the beauty of Yefet, which we know is the Greek culture, the Greek language, shall dwell in the most intimate part of Shem, which is the Sefer Torah, the Holy Torah. So a Sefer Torah can be written in Greek, as the Gemara says, and it is kosher. And that's because of the closeness that we have to the Greek culture. So let's talk about some Greek culture. I'm going to give some introductory words about the Hellenistic kingdom, and then we'll get into Athens. So first of all, the map of the Hellenistic kingdom. This is a map of the entire Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. It features his progress from Pella, from Macedonia, all the way down to Egypt, and then through Israel, and all the way to the border of India, and then back to Babylon, where he dies. And in this Greek world, we have what is called the seven wonders of the ancient world, which many of us forget is a list compiled by the Greeks, because the Greeks, now that they have this vast empire, they traveled throughout the empire. It was all part of the empire. And so there were these Greek travelers who kept the equivalent of traveler diaries today, and they would make lists of, here's the seven must-see places in the world. So the whole idea of the seven wonders of the ancient world, which today we have the seven wonders of the modern world, right? That idea comes from the Greeks, and I just wanted to show that that's one of those influences that we have. But now let's talk about Greece itself. So Greece is the symbol of Greece. I used here the Parthenon because that is the most important building in Athens, and of course the gold olive wreath, which is the award given to Olympic champions and so on, something that lasts until today in the West, where you have awards that have these olive wreaths, right? So that comes from Athens. So we're going to talk about Greece, and we want to just get our appetite going, talk about Greek salad, right? And which is favorite dish here in Israel. I mean, it's a Mediterranean dish, very popular. Greek salad, of course, Greek olive oil, and the Greek olive oil, interestingly, has a deep connection to Klal Yisrael, to the way Jews look at the ideas of wisdom and light and peace in interesting ways. And I want to show how the Greeks look at olive oil philosophically, historically, and then we'll sort of find correlations. So first of all, the Greek olive tree. There are historians that say that it is actually the Greeks who first cultivated the Greek olive and started producing olive oil, and of course that takes us to the island of Sparta. Why is that? Because here in Sparta is the museum of the Greek olive tree and olive oil. So a nice little museum near the countryside of Sparta, what is known as the City of Warriors. From we surely heard about Sparta, and in this museum there's a lot to see. There's very little that Google Earth has given us access to, but there's archaeology, ancient ways of storing wine, modern ways of storing wine, modern olive oil, ancient olive oil, right, which we know is a major export in Greece until today. All over the world is Greek olive oil. So there's a lot of the history of olive oil. Here's some archaeology. That's really nice. And outside in the courtyard is some olive trees, of course. And there are different types of olive presses, ancient and more contemporary, that show us how olives were processed at different times. So, for example, in this plaque, it says ancient times, archios chronos, ancient times. So there's these different olive presses. And the interesting thing is, in Hebrew, right, even in the Mishnah, what do we call an olive press? We call it a Beit Habad. A bad, like the badim of the Aron, the beams which were used to carry the ark, the Aron Abrit, this is a beam which was weighed down with these stones to press onto the olives that are inside these sacks, because it decreases the pressure. In other words, you're not cracking open the olives, you're putting slow pressure on them and forcing the olive oil out. So this is really neat. How does this all relate to the more philosophical aspects of olive oil as wisdom, as chachma, which is a value that the Greeks stood for? That takes us back to the archaeology and to the Olympic Games. So take a look at this amphora, which is the Greek word, shows up in the Mishnah as well, in Baba Metzia, clay amphoria. An amphora is a typical jug, except this jug was decorated with the particular branch of athletics which the champion of the Olympics won. And so this particular champion happened to have been a runner, and he got a very custom-made Greek vase. There are experts today who can tell you exactly who produced it. This is a black figure vase as opposed to the red figure. I don't get into all that stuff, but it's very famous. And they would have received a lifetime supply of olive oil, meaning it's basically liquid gold, right? As they called it, it's liquid gold. So this is the gift that's given to the Olympic champions. But what is the connection between olive oil and wisdom and the Olympics, the Olympic Games and competition? So to explore that idea, I would like to take us, of course, to Mount Olympus. So let's take a jump. I'm just reminding you, if at any time you have a question, feel free. You can write in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on the chat. So here is Mount Olympus. Now, Mount Olympus is one of the highest mountains, highest mountain in Greece, which was a bit inaccessible at the time, unless you're Prometheus, who climbs up and steals the fire from the gods, as the story in the Greek mythology goes, of course. And the Greeks believed that the main gods of Greece lived in some kind of heavenly temple on top of Mount Olympus. Of course, there's a lot more than the Olympian gods. The 12 Olympian gods who lived up there, but that was a major point in Greece. So at the foot of Mount Olympus, they would have these ceremonial competitions every 4 years, known as Olympics. And they would be every 4 years, as we know, until today. And those 4 years are called Olympiads. Just like we have Lahavdil, we have Shemitah, right? We have a sabbatical every 7 years. Every 4 years, they had an Olympiad. And the Olympiad was a sacred ceasefire. It was a pan-Hellenistic celebration, and you could walk safely and securely through an enemy city during the Olympics because it was a pan-Hellenistic celebration. So that's Mount Olympus. Now, that's why it's called the Olympic Games, and we'll get a little bit more into what's behind it, but I first want to show you at least, see what kind of view we can get of Mount Olympus. Wow, that is quite a view. It's not a place that you just climb, right? It's inaccessible to the average person, and I'm sure that breathing up here is not so easy as well. So this is the Greek idea of the Olympics. Now, before we continue to Athens itself, or herself maybe, I'd like to wrap up the idea of olive oil and connect it to Athena and the mythology, and then we'll get into Athens and the Olympics. So this picture depicts Athena, who is planting an olive tree right outside the Acropolis, the temple of Athena, the Parthenon. And next to her is the dove with the olive branch, which I snuck in there in this AI-generated image, which I made for this presentation, because the Jewish symbol of peace comes from the Yonah and the Zayit, right? The story of Noah, which has curious connections to the story of Chanukah, not only in the blessing of Yefet, but even in the word Yonah. If you think of how you spell Yonah, Yonah is feminine of Yon, Yavan. So there's that, right? Very interesting thing. Even Alezait Taraf Befia relates in curious ways to Taraf Yosef and Yosef and the beauty of Yosef. I mean, we could go on and on about this. Even the sheet of Rabbi Tarfon about the height of the menorah is hinted in Taraf Befia. So this, I'm really, I digress, but there's a lot of hints in there that relate to it. But the Yonah and the olive, which is today an international symbol of peace, right, is because of the story of the Mabul, of the flood. But in the Greek version, the olive tree is a symbol of peace for a different reason. So let's get into the story. The story is about the gift of Athena to the citizens of Cercopolis, which then turned to be named Athena, but it was called Cercopolis at the time. And the story goes as follows. We have the family of the Greek gods, the mythology, all those funny characters who, curiously enough, act a lot like their worshippers in terms of jealousy and conniving and affairs and all that stuff. So let's just say very nefarious, very inappropriate. You can imagine that for Jews, this is not something you want as a role model, but this is the Greek mythology and the Greek stories and so on and so forth. And that takes us to Mount Olympus, where the Greeks believed that the main Olympian gods resided. Right, you'll recognize the images of the Olympics there, the Olympic torch, which is part of the athletics there and the symbol of the 5 continents in the Olympics. All right. Now, on Mount Olympus lived happily, or not so much, the 12 Olympian deities, the Olympian gods, as they're known in Greek mythology. And we could talk a lot about them, but I want to focus specifically on the competition which ensued by the order of Zeus. Of course, it's all about competition. This is in the Greek mythologies, between the goddess of wisdom, Athena, holding the owl, and the god of the ocean, Poseidon, holding the trident. So the story goes as follows. Both of them approach the inhabitants of Cercopolis, Cercopians, whatever, and offer them a gift. It's a competition, and based on the gift that they choose, the god who gave the gift will be the primary deity of the city, which was, of course, we know in all idolatry, there's like, they didn't believe that there's a one God. They didn't believe in monotheism. They just believed that each city has its own God and you have to appease the right one and, play the game. So Poseidon takes his trident, slams it into a rock, and out comes gushing salt water, symbolizing the blessing of the sea, which is, of course, one of the strengths of Athens, and there were great seafarers. On the other hand, Athena comes with her lance, slams it into the earth, and out comes the olive tree. And the Athenians, or the Cercopians, choose the gift of Athena over the gift of Poseidon, which of course made him want to wash the place over and angered him. So they built a temple for him too. But the main point of Athena is that she's the goddess of warfare and wisdom and the arts. And she chose a wise gift, a gift which gives a lot of economic prosperity to the Greeks. Olive oil is a symbol of wisdom, of course, relates to Athena. And of course, the tree itself, gives you fruit, it gives you shade, it gives you wood. So that's kind of the giving tree of Shel Silverstein, right? It's very useful. But in addition to that, it lasts for many hundreds of years, which is why it's the symbol of peace. So we have a very interesting connection here between olive trees, wisdom, and Athena. And you think about Chachma, Shemen Zayit, the menorah, Chanukah, like all that stuff. It's a very interesting thing that even in those areas we have this relationship. And when it comes to the Olympics, not only did the Olympic champions receive a huge quantity of olive oil as an award, but they also would rub the olive oil into their skin to get the blessing and the gifts of Athena, which takes us to the Olympic Games, because the athletes in the Greek world believed that putting olive oil on your body will give you the gifts and the success of the goddess of warfare, right, in competition and wisdom. So a culture who looks at olive oil as representing light, the fire of light, and the symbol of wisdom, this is a very important similarity to Klal Yisrael, where we are a nation that, while we don't have this exacerbated focus on the perfection of the human body like the Greeks did, but we have a focus on chachma, on wisdom, on the perfection of the person, living an enlightened life, right? So these are things that when the Greeks arrived in Israel, their culture really took us by storm, because the culture was very, very similar in these specific aspects, while you ignore all the other stuff, which sort of is a package deal and, slowly trickles in. But in this aspect, it was very much a challenge. So now I'd like to take us to the city of Athena itself, the city of Athens, and let's explore a little bit more. We're going to take a jump now to the Acropolis, meaning the highest point of the city. Behold the Acropolis, the most famous Greek structure in the world, more famous than the theater, and I will prove it to you. But this is the temple which was built around 2,400 years ago on the highest point of the city, the Acropolis, in honor of the goddess of wisdom, the namesake of Athens, Athena. Athena, whose full name is Athena Parthenos, or Athena the Virgin. So this has to do with purity. You can even joke and say virgin olive oil, but the truth is that in the fields here, they actually planted olive trees in antiquity, and only virgin women were allowed to tend to those trees because of the honor of Athena. And it must have had a statue of Athena inside. The place has been through a lot of destruction. So this is the Parthenon, as it's called. There's, of course, a temple for Poseidon here because of the story, and there's other things as well, and there's some theaters around here. So you see that there's places of culture. This is the theater of Dionysus, and there's another one here. If you zoom out, there's also a horse race track, a hippodrome. So a lot of fun stuff. There's a very cultured city with a gymnasium, as is appropriate for every Greek city. And here at the heart of Greece, we have the cultural center of the Hellenistic world. lehavdil, everyone in the Jewish world today, if you want to, you want to learn, you go to Israel and you learn and so on. In Greece, even Antiochus, who was in Syria, probably born in Syria, went to Shana ben Be'atuna, right? He learned in Atuna, in Athens for, I don't know, a year or two, a few years of proper Greek education to be literate, because that's what Greeks did. You would go to Athena and you get a proper Greek education from a very young age. You're trained in the arts, you're trained in philosophy, you're trained in warfare, you're trained in mathematics and sciences and all that. So you can see that that would be enticing. Now, when I said that this is the most famous Greek structure in the world, if you look at the way it's built with the Doric pillars and the gabled pediment, the whole triangular shape, this is like the symbol of the Bank of America. I mean, this is every museum. This is every public building, public school. The first public school in the United States, the Latin school in Boston looks like. I mean, the building was rebuilt several times, but looks like this. I mean, this is common in the Western world. You go around the Western world, and Greek architecture is everywhere. Right? That means that there's a very profound impact of the Greek world on the Western world. And by the way, the Knesset was deliberately not made in Greek fashion, but rather meant to look like the Mishkan. This was done consciously. Even though naturally you would say, why not? I mean, the first school in Israel was the Hebrew gymnasium, the Gymnasia Ivri, right? So, all right. So what is actually inside the Parthenon? Well, what's left there now after it was reconstructed, I mean, after earthquakes and fires and attacks and so on, I mean, it was rebuilt, but there was a lord from England, I think this is like in the 1800s, Lord Elgin, who was able to preserve and save these reliefs that were inside, and he brought them to the British Museum, which is, of course, a very hot topic today. The Elgin reliefs, should they be sent back, etc. What remains in Greece is across the street in the Parthenon Museum. In the Parthenon Museum, which is built with the ratio of the actual Parthenon, so you get to see the reliefs, whether inside, facing inward, outward, on top, more or less in their position, not necessarily their height. This area is reconstructed. You see that there is a clean whiteness to it. It's not the dirty, corroded stone that's in the back. This is the original. We'll see the originals shortly because they're in the British Museum. But this is a museum you can visit. It's across the street from the Parthenon, and you get to see some of the majesty of the most famous edifice of the Greek culture. So this is the museum across the street, but now we're going to go to London, where we get to see the originals and a lot more. The British Museum in London, one of my more favorite museums in the world. There is so much to do here in relationship to Tanakh and Jewish history in general. But one thing at a time. Look at the design of the building, and it has a striking resemblance to the Parthenon, and this is deliberate because drawing from the sources of the Greek world, the building, a public building, which is for the proliferation of wisdom and the arts and culture, obviously is going to look like the Parthenon, right? Of course, they changed things around a little bit. They made it a little bit bigger, but you get the idea. It's intended to look like the Parthenon. And you look on top, they, of course, filled it up with characters, except these aren't the 12 Olympian gods. These represent different aspects of culture and art and inquisitiveness and so on, represented as people or anthropomorphized, which is what Greeks did, of course. This lasts even in the Roman world. I mean, you look today, the Statue of Liberty or Lady Justice, right? It's a person who looks like a Greek character, but it really is an idea, right? So that's the Greek the Greek influence on the British Museum, and we have some nice Doric capitals. It's really cool. All right, let's move into the museum and see some of the Greek stuff. So we have lots going on here. This is actually a shrine called the Nereid Monument. It's not the Parthenon. We'll see that in a moment, but I want you to see the typical shape, the way it's built. Now, if you want to see one more benign way in which Greek architecture has influenced the world, and it's been sort of like absorbed into Judaism without you even noticing it, because it's become so benign. It's this shape is found in many shuls as the Aron Kodesh. It's on the cover of your typical Gemara, your Talmud by the widow Ram and her children. The standard publication has like that shape with the pillars and all these creatures, except there's no deities in the middle. That was cleaned up. But the cover for like an entranceway, a fancy entranceway, this is common. This is typical. I've seen houses in Lakewood, New Jersey, that have this design around the house and nobody even knows that it's Greek, right? So like it's there in many interesting ways, and it's just been cleaned up and nobody really cares that it comes from the Greeks. But that's kind of cool to notice that. But what I want to point out is the craftsmanship, the level of the artwork here, even though these are depicting like war scenes and so on and other things as well. There's somebody here sitting on a throne with a parasol. When you compare the Greek statues with anything that came before them, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Persians, the Egyptians, it simply does not compare. What they built, the predecessors built, you could see that it's not realistic. It's a representation. The Greeks made portraits. Now you think it looked like this, but wait till you see the next part. I'm going to share with you. 1 second. So this is a picture I took last year at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There was a special exhibition called Chrome, which is a variation of an exhibition started in Germany called Gods in Color. But the idea is that they've done some significant research into Greek and Roman statues and have found remains of pigment. There's a lot of study that's gone into this. There's a lot of publications about this now, but it shows that in the Greek world, the statues were very vibrant and colorful and lifelike. With the one mistake they made here is that they covered them with lime first instead of painting directly onto the marble, which makes it more translucent. But that's a side point. So I took some pictures when I was at the Met. Here's a picture with an image from some sarcophagus showing you the Greek-Persian wars, and you see the Persians fighting the Greeks, who, of course, didn't really fight in the nude like that, but it's more for the display of the Greek body. They were really hung up about that. So they want to show that. And then I had a lot of fun there, of course. So here's many pictures there. Some are Greek, some are Roman. I tried to censor what I could with rubber duckies. These are bronzes that are painted. But basically my point is that in the Greek world, everything was colorful. So when you look at all of these, don't think that it was just nice and white. This was all beautifully colored. So the next room over shows us an introduction to the Parthenon, and it shows you a lot of different things. These are the Elgin statues. So some of these are replicas, some of these are original, but the next room, everything's original. So here's the shape. It almost looks like a UNESCO, logo, but because that's the point. And you see here on the side that there is just a little bit of paint, giving you the idea that you need to project the paint onward and realize that this was all magnificently colored. Polychromy painted decoration here. They have a plaque about that. Right. So next room over, we have a lot going on, but this is one small part of the complex of the Acropolis, and it shows you Athena supporting some kind of roof. And it shows you where it came from on the Acropolis. And in the next room over, because we could spend an hour here, so I'm jumping around, we have the main room in the British Museum, which focuses on the Acropolis. And here you have the real Elgin statues and reliefs. So look at this shape. Let me help with a little bit of a visual aid. This is a reconstruction of the gabled pediment, the triangular shape on top of the entrance. And this is what we see as a replica of that in the entrance to the British Museum. So this triangular shape with all the Olympian gods, or Athena at the center, whatever it is, this was at the entrance to the temple. And then when we turn around, you'll see that this is built in the same shape as the Parthenon, and it has all the statues on the side. So lots of details, lots to see. And if it wasn't in the British Museum, it probably wouldn't have survived. So With all the modern conversation about who appropriated what, it is important to notice that the museum played a very important role in helping these survive. All right, so these are the Parthenon reliefs. Now let's move ahead to talk about some other details also here in the museum. Very interesting how important characters were turned into statues, which were venerated throughout the Greek world and into the Roman world. Let's show you a few of these characters and who they are and why they are important to us even in today's world. So let's look at this guy up on top. His name is Hippocrates. I don't know if there's any doctors here, but if you are a doctor, you have to take an oath, and it's called the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath is an oath which was actually written by Hippocrates. Of course, it mentions the different deities like Hygeia, right? The word hygiene comes from there, or Asclepius, the god of health, right? So those things which are they slightly modified to the Hippocratic Oath that doctors take today come from the Greek doctor Hippocrates. So that's an example of ideas of the Greeks that trickle down into Western culture. Then we have Homer, of course, or as Chazal call him, Homeros. Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are known as epic poems. There's some of the pictures of the epic poems here on this marble slab, but he basically was the preserver of epic tradition, which are very ancient stories of the Greeks. The Greeks consider it to be like our equivalent of Yetziat Mitzrayim is their story of the Battle of Troy, the Trojan Wars, because that's where the Greek nation was basically born. Now, here's a few very interesting characters. The one all the way on the left is Socrates, who is known as that damned monotheist, as they called him, because he challenged the norms of Greek culture. He lived in Athens, and he was a big troublemaker, but he started what's known today as Socratic debate. Right? It's a certain method of debate, which is adopted to an extent by Chazal. I mean, the Greek form of debating and philosophy was seen as a good thing by our forebears and Chazal, and they actually integrated it into the way we conduct debate. So that's an example. I mean, obviously, I don't have enough time to bring all the supporting evidence for that. I'm just going to put that out there. But this is just an example of how certain similarities with the Greeks didn't deter us. We said, this is good. We like it. And we'll see some more examples. And these two gentlemen, the one all the way on the right is Epicurus. An Epicurean lifestyle is a kind of lifestyle that focuses on enjoying your life here and now, based on a philosophical school founded by Epicurus. And that's a word which has a negative connotation, as Chazal say in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, Dama shetashiv leEpikuros, right? Know how to answer an Epicurean. So this is actually Epicurus, and the gentleman next to him is Plato. I'm sure we all know about Plato, and I forget right now who the other person is, but he's also a famous name. So that's the characters. And one last character in the British Museum is, of course, Alexander the Great, who brought this culture, the Hellenistic culture, to the world. And that's why the plaque here says the Hellenistic world, art and culture, etc., etc. So on that note, I'd like to now jump ahead. We're almost done, but I would like to jump to the slides and talk a little bit about Alexander the Great, and then we'll go to the United States and see some fascinating things and wrap up with the story of the Maccabees. So Athens, Greece, here's a picture of an athlete like we saw, and this is from an amphora. The Greeks would tell their stories on amphorae when they would convey their culture in comic books and movies. And you think about how you spread a culture. I mean, these are really important mechanisms for conveying a culture, for spreading it around. And you come to Israel, and your next door neighbor is seeing all this stuff, and he starts asking questions, and it becomes interesting. And this is a conversation starter. What are these pictures? What are these stories? And of course, it's a topic for a lot of discussion today. So the Greek culture is very much told. Now, I want to show you just quickly when Alexander the Great conquers the the world, right? He dies shortly after. He's around for about 12 years since he conquered the world, and after he died, the empire sort of fell into war between his different generals. The main ones are mentioned here. There's Ptolemy, there's Seleucus, there's Antigonus, and so on. And these generals, known as Diodochoi, carved up the empire into smaller empires, and each one became a king of that particular empire. The largest empires fell into the hands of Ptolemy, who ruled over Egypt, Alexandria. Here it is. You see, I made him yellow so you can connect it to Egypt. And there is Seleucus, who is the founder of the Seleucid Syrian Greek army. So he's based in Syria, in the city of Antiochia, and his son is Antiochus. So Antiochia is somewhere near Damascus, but a lot further up and around that line. You see it here. So this is where the connection to the Jews begins, because after Alexander dies, his diadochoi are basically the two most prominent ones, Ptolemy and Seleucus, are fighting over Israel. So in the beginning, Ptolemy controls it, and that's when the Torah is translated into Greek with the Ptolemaic dynasty, the lighthouse of Alexandria, all of that. And Seleucus is Antiochus's great-great-great-grandfather. So Antiochus IV is the one who issued the decrees and who he fought against. They're coming from Syria. All right. Let's take a quick jump. We're going to go now quickly to the United States. New York City. I'll be here in under a week. It's Hashem. The Ulysses S. Grant Memorial in right off of I think it's 81st Street. I don't remember, but it's on the west side. So the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial is built like a typical Greek mausoleum. I'm a Cohen, so never walked inside, but it's built in typical Greek fashion. And here you are in the United States. Nothing peculiar about it, right? Because why not? And another example of the Greek culture, before we jump into a museum, I just had to stop here for a moment, is the United States Post Office, the main post office on 8th Avenue, right across the street from Madison Square Garden. Now, the reason I'm bringing you here is, first of all, to show you the similarity to the Parthenon, except these are Corinthian capitals, those are Doric capitals. But the other interesting thing, other than it being a Parthenon in the middle of New York City, is the quote on top, which is really cool. The quote on top, neither snow nor rain, nor heat nor gloom of night, stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. That quote is taken from Herodotus, who is describing the Greek-Persian wars, specifically the war of Ahasuerus against the Persians, in which he lost, right? The War of Thermopylae. There's a famous movie by Warner Brothers called 300, but it's based on that story. And this is describing the Persian messenger system in the context of that battle, which kind of relates to Purim more, because it's all about the swift riders running out all over the place to spread the message around the empire. And it just sounds a little over the top about like unless you understand the Persian Empire. But anyway, that's really cool. I had to show you that. But I really wanted to take you to the Boston Fine Arts Museum. So welcome to Boston, and yet another imitation of the Parthenon. Not so surprising, of course. I'll let that load for a moment so you get to see it. Here it is. Of course, it's a lot smaller than the British Museum, a lot smaller than the Met, but quite a respectable museum, and I've been here many times. Let's jump into the Greek Gallery, which has 2 floors. The upper floor, which connects to the Roman Gallery as well, has a room called Daily Life in Ancient Greece. And you can see that this room is full of amphorae, of Greek vases and pitchers and craters and all kinds of household dishes from terracotta, from clay, and they all tell different stories. Here's a story of warfare. Here's some soldiers playing some kind of board game, and lots of other stuff. And I'm going to point out maybe 2 or 3 things in this room before we move downstairs to our final point here about warfare. Remember Homer, the preserver of the epic tradition, which includes the Odyssey and the Iliad, and that's of course where we get the Battle of Troy from, the Trojan War. The Trojan War is depicted here on this entire display from wall to wall, on household vessels, on jewelry, on mirrors, on relief, earrings. I mean, you name it. Everything here depicts the story from beginning to end, and obviously from different collections from across history, from hundreds of years apart, but that's not the point. The point is that everybody is engaged in this foundational story of the Greeks, which is basically their story of their nation, who they are, right? The Greek wars, the Trojan Wars. So the Greek nation spreads this a lot. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because of the focus on the story as the preserver of your identity. That is something that we as Jews very much appreciate, is the focus on education. Now, the values here are definitely contestable to us in many ways. It's a lot about the gods and the way that they interact with each other, and they make people fight against each other, and they're like all this inappropriate stuff with Zeus. I don't even have to go into it, not even to mention Hercules, like the hero, who's really horrible. But at the end of the day, the focus on education to this extent is something admirable. And on that note, I want to talk about where Jews spread our culture in a very curious place that we took from the Greeks, and that is the symposium. When we say symposium today, what comes to mind? You think of a lecture, a panel of experts, right? In the Greek world, the symposium was indeed some sort of panel of experts, except they were drinking wine, and not at the reception before, but during. In fact, they would announce the topic of conversation ahead of time. We're going to go to so-and-so's house at this and this date, this and this time, and we're going to be drinking X numbers, different types of wine. And we're going to discuss the new decrees or whatever, political affairs or sports, whatever it be. They turned this into an art form, which of course had a lot of less, let's say, appropriate things happening too. But one of the things that are important to us is the culture. And that's why the symposium is the name of Plato's description of Socrates' debate. That was Aristotle, by the way. The other statue that I missed, that's Aristotle. So let's take a look at this example. So we have people reclining, right? Reclining as they're drinking wine, of course, reclining on their left as they're drinking wine, singing songs, and engaged in storytelling, very reminiscent of Pesach. Now, I actually read an article about this when I was studying in YU, and Richie Hidary taught us about this, but there's some serious stuff, is that Chazal actually took the Greek symposium and cleaned it up into a family-friendly event, saying like, there's something of value here. Let's take this event where people gather together and engage in wisdom, right? This is a very valuable thing. And there's, of course, a lot more to talk about in terms of attitudes towards wine, which the Greeks looked at as something that opens up the intellect and enables you to engage in conversation, which is something that we also do. But it also has the flip side, which is Nichnas yain yatsa sod, or wine reveals that which is hidden, in the world of the words of Aristophanes, but very similar to the Gemara and Sanhedrin, right? But the attitude towards wine as being something which you can either go drunk or you can open up and be wiser. I was going to say a word about Greek tragedy. Our time is short, so I'll be very, very quick. But a cornerstone of English literature until today is Greek tragedy and Greek comedy. You read about Sophocles, Aeschylus and Sophocles, right? All these different people, and Euripides and Eumenides. They tell stories like Orpheus, who plays the harp, or Sisyphus, and stories which really deal with human nature and with human tragedy and loss. But the one thing I'll say about them now, and because I want to get to the next point, is that they place the gods at the center, and the humans are always there to sort of show the perfection of the gods. And if the human beings dare to try to challenge the gods, they will pay for that eternally. So, for example, Arachnia, the spinner, becomes the spider for challenging Athena, or Sisyphus is condemned to push a rock up the hill to the end of time, and it keeps on falling down because he tried to challenge and outsmart the gods. So there is this focus on the gods being at the center and the human beings being beneath them, which is very different than the Jewish view of looking at the world as a partnership with God, with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Is hitalech lefanai v'heyeh tamim. It's complete the world. Brit Milah, for example, Bris Milah is to take the nature forward and say it's not good enough, right? Famous arguments with Rabbi Akiva and Turanos Rufus, the Roman, of course, about whose deeds, ma'asav shel minaim yoter. What do you prefer, wheat or a cookie, right? Humanity's involvement in the world is taking it further, and that's really a key point in the clash where the Greeks could not come to terms with this. Okay, our last point here in the Boston Museum is the aspect of warfare. We're going to sort of wrap up here. If you'll forgive me because we started a few minutes late. If it's okay, I'll go until just a little 5 minutes extra. I hope that's okay. So Greek warfare. So here's Greek armor of different types: shield, sword, depictions of Greek warfare and its status in the Greek world. It was something that was a point of pride, and it's part of your status. And there's different types of armors and shields, right? So this is all related to the Greek warriors, and there's a lot more going on here, but we're going to focus right now on the Greek warriors. Okay, so let's move on to our final point, which has to do with the Maccabees. We are in Israel under the Seleucid Syrian Greek army. That's when the story of Chanukah happens. And we are dealing with a very advanced and formidable form of Greek warfare. This formation, this is from the movie 300, which is the battle against Ahasuerus, Xerxes, shows you a Greek battle formation known as the phalanx. And the phalanx, known as the Macedonian phalanx, is basically the battle formation which includes a technology of the sophisticated armor and very rigorous training of moving together as one unit in large numbers with long spears covered by arrows, and there's elephants like tanks. I mean, it's a sophisticated system. It was completely unstoppable, right? And the question is, how on earth were the Maccabees capable of standing up to this? And we could do an entire presentation just on that. But of course, we need to understand that when we talk about the Alanisim, Rabim biad me'atim, Tmeim biad teorim, like, we need to understand what we were up against. And it's not just like, okay, Mila Hashem Elai, let's go fight them. Like, that worked in a little skirmish with a few soldiers who were, let's just say, a little bit caught off guard. But now when you've invoked the wrath of the army, you're in big trouble. How did we manage? How did we keep the spirit to keep on fighting against this formidable army? That is part of the story of Chanukah, to appreciate what we didn't even think about winning. We were just trying to stand up for our values, right? So I'm going to mention a couple of things. The Chakra fortress, I'm going to really skim through this, but this is the fortress which was built to control Har HaBayit, to control the temple, and it was eventually the soldiers that were eventually starved out after a several-year siege by Shimon, but that was much, much, much later. And I'd like to take us to the story of Chanukah and really end with a little bit about coins. When the Maccabees actually won the battle, they established the Hasmonean dynasty, and as kings do, I mean, even before you become kings, the first thing you do is issue new money. The coins that they issued are used in modern Israeli money in many different ways. So, for example, this is a coin made by Matityahu Antigonos, one of the great-great-grandchildren of Matityahu, and it's on the 10 agora coin, and it's the symbol of the Bank of Israel. But it's based on this coin. I'm going to share with you a really, really cool story, and with your permission, 5 more minutes and we'll be done, okay? So this coin is the last Maccabean coin to ever be minted, right before King Herod kills the last king and becomes king of Judea, and that's, of course, Matityahu Antigonos. So Matityahu Antigonos is under siege in Jerusalem, and he mints this small coin copper coin, and very few of them have been found. Very few, like I think 30 of them, maybe 60. I'm getting the number wrong. I've only seen 2 of them in my life, both in the Israel Museum. And it's famous because it's the first earliest depiction ever found of the 7-branched menorah. And it's from a time in which the menorah was in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple, in use. What's lesser known is what's on the other side of the coin. It's a little hard to tell what that is. Look closely, you see that it's inside a circle made by little dots, which was stamped a little bit off the center with a little letter. There's some Greek letters around here that say Antigonos Basileos. It's Antigonos the king, but it's a symbol of something. And here's what it is. We have the menorah on one side, and we have the shulchan on the other. And these two, the showbread table and the menorah, were inside the Beit HaMikdash. This is a famous picture by the Temple Institute, but you get the idea. These are symbols of the kehuna, of what the priests stood for, right? And it's, of course, all about Kohanim, this battle, and the Chashmonaim are continuing that tradition. So that's one coin. And the other coin, so this is a famous one, and the other coin is a coin which is on the 2 shekel coin today, which is a coin that says Yochanan HaKohen, Rosh Chever HaYehudim. Yochanan, Yochanan the priest, the head of the Jews. In other words, he didn't call himself a king. He wasn't really a king. Kohanim aren't supposed to be kings. So, I guess it's also out of respect for the tradition, but that's the picture. So this is the coin. You see, though, there's an olive wreath, which means king, surrounding the ancient Hebrew letters, Yochanan HaKohen, Rosh Chever HaYehudim. So that was that story. I would like to take us to our final point. I'm going to jump from here to Chanukah in the Israel Museum, and we'll see the connection to coins, and we'll wrap up. That was a quick jump to the Israel Museum's Judaica area, which showcases dozens of Chanukah menorahs from around the world, not the whole world, but a lot from around the world. And there's a special focus here on the menorahs from the land of Israel. And I can show them to you up close. Let's take a look. So we have one which has a soldier and it says Chanukah. We have a really nice one from the Bezalel Art School showing you they're cleaning the chatzer, they're cleaning up, lighting the menorah. And at the very bottom where it says Bezalel Yerushalayim, you see these little medallions which look like there are coins on them, right? As well as on the top. And that's because it's using as an inspiration the Maccabee coins and the Great Revolt coins and the Bar Kokhba coins. They're actually there on the display next to the menorah. I just couldn't get a good picture of it on Google Earth. So coming full circle, we've absorbed a lot from the Greeks along the way. I mean, if I had to mention how many Greek words are in Chazal, it's somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000, right? There's a lot of things that we did absorb, but at the end of the day, the idea of Chanukah is to stand up for what's unique to Am Yisrael and not to be absorbed to assimilate out, but rather to assimilate in the good things, right? Which we hopefully, when we're successful, we are able to do even today in the cultures that we live in and see things that are similar and good to us, but absorb them in and not leave it for those things just because of these similarities. But the story of the Maccabees and their archaeology is very much part of the coming back to Israel and the first art school, the Bezalel Art School, as a vision of what art is supposed to look like in our land. So it's a really cool concept. And that's, in a nutshell, a bit of a glimpse of the story of the light of Chanukah, the story of the similarities and differences between the Greeks and the Jews. I wish I could spend two hours doing this as I would in the museum, but you can catch up with me in the Bible Lands Museum or in the Metropolitan Museum of Art to do that there. Chanukah Sameach, thank you so much for your time.